The shadow self and toxic patterns. The depths of human psychology lies a truth that Carl Jung spent his lifetime uncovering. There are certain patterns, certain behaviors, certain ways of being that signal profound psychological disturbance. Today, we explore Jung's most crucial insights about the people you should never let into your inner circle. Carl Gustav Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who revolutionized our understanding of the human psyche, identified specific traits that indicate someone has never confronted their shadow self. These are the people who will drain your energy, manipulate your emotions, and ultimately destroy your peace of mind. The concept of the shadow. Before we can identify toxic individuals, we must understand Jung's concept of the shadow. The shadow represents the hidden, repressed, or denied aspects of our personality. It contains our primitive, negative, or socially unacceptable impulses. Jung believed that everyone has a shadow, but the crucial difference lies in how we handle it. Psychologically healthy individuals acknowledge their shadow, integrate it, and learn from it. Toxic individuals, however, project their shadow onto others, refuse to acknowledge their darkness, and remain unconsciously driven by their repressed impulses. Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. Carl Jung: when someone has never done the inner work of shadow integration, they become dangerous to be around. They operate from a place of unconscious psychological chaos, and they will inevitably drag others into that chaos. Jung observed that unintegrated individuals exhibit specific patterns of behavior. They blame others for their problems, they cannot take responsibility for their actions, and they have an insatiable need to control their environment and the people around them. The projection trap. One of the most dangerous traits Jung identified is chronic projection. This occurs when someone unconsciously attributes their own thoughts, feelings, and motives to others. If you encounter someone who constantly accuses others of the very behaviors they themselves exhibit, you're witnessing projection in action. The person who always claims others are lying is often the liar. The person who insists everyone else is selfish is usually the most self-centered. Consider Sarah, who constantly accuses her friends of being jealous of her success. She interprets every neutral comment as an attack, every suggestion as criticism. What Sarah doesn't realize is that she's projecting her own deep-seated jealousy and insecurity onto everyone around her. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Carl Jung taught that what we react to most strongly in others is often a reflection of our own unacknowledged shadow. But while psychologically healthy people can use this insight for self-reflection, toxic individuals remain trapped in the projection cycle. These individuals create a distorted reality where they're always the victim, always misunderstood, always surrounded by people who are out to get them. This paranoid worldview makes genuine relationships impossible. Warning signs of chronic projection include constantly playing the victim while victimizing others, attributing malicious intent to neutral actions, inability to see their own role in relationship conflicts, and a persistent belief that everyone else is the problem. The lack of self-awareness. Jung emphasized that self-awareness is the foundation of psychological health. Individuals who lack self-awareness are particularly dangerous because they operate from unconscious drives they cannot recognize or control. These individuals have no insight into their own motivations, emotions, or impact on others. They cannot understand why their relationships fail, why people eventually distance themselves, or why they consistently encounter the same problems. Meet David, who prides himself on being brutally honest. He regularly insults friends and family members, claiming he's just being real. When people react negatively, David is genuinely confused. He cannot see that his honesty is actually cruelty, and his authenticity is simply unprocessed aggression. Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens. Carl Jung believed that without self-awareness, we remain asleep to our own psychological processes. We become automatons, driven by unconscious complexes and patterns we don't understand. Individuals lacking self-awareness exhibit several key characteristics. They cannot recognize their own emotional states. They have no insight into how their behavior affects others. They cannot learn from their mistakes because they don't see them as mistakes. And they have an external locus of control, always blaming circumstances or other people for their problems. The manipulation of others. Observed that individuals who haven't done their inner work often become skilled manipulators. They use others as extensions of their own ego, treating people as objects to be controlled, rather than individuals to be respected. These individuals have an intuitive understanding of human psychology, but they use this knowledge to exploit rather than connect. They can read people's weaknesses, insecurities, and desires, and they use this information to get what they want. Common manipulation tactics include gaslighting, making others question their own reality and perceptions, emotional blackmail, using guilt, fear, or obligation to control behavior, love bombing followed by withdrawal, creating addiction to their approval, and triangulation, playing people against each other to maintain control. Consider Rachel, who seems incredibly empathetic and understanding when you first meet her. She listens intently, offers support, and makes you feel special. But gradually, you notice that she remembers every vulnerability you've shared, and she uses this information to manipulate you whenever she wants something. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Carl Jung understood that people who cannot accept themselves completely will always try to control others to feel better about themselves. They cannot find peace within, so they seek to create the illusion of peace through external control. From a Jungian perspective, manipulation is a defense mechanism against the anxiety of confronting one's own shadow. Rather than face their own darkness, manipulators project it onto others and then try to control those projections. The inability to take responsibility, perhaps the most telling sign of an unintegrated individual, is their complete inability to take responsibility for their actions, choices, and their impact on others. Jung taught that taking responsibility is essential for psychological growth. It's only when we acknowledge our role in creating our experiences that we can begin to change them. Mark consistently arrives late to work, misses deadlines, and creates tension with colleagues. When confronted, he always has an excuse. Traffic was unusually bad. His alarm didn't work, his computer crashed, a family emergency came up. Mark has never once acknowledged that his pattern of lateness is his responsibility. I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become. Carl Jung individuals who cannot take responsibility remain trapped in victimhood. They see themselves as passive recipients of life's circumstances rather than active creators of their experience. Jung's insights into the shadow self and how unintegrated individuals exhibit toxic patterns that make them dangerous to be around. We've seen how projection, lack of self-awareness, manipulation, and the inability to take responsibility create a psychological profile of someone who will inevitably cause harm to those who get close to them. Jung's message is clear. Until someone has done the difficult work of confronting their own shadow, integrating their darkness, and taking responsibility for their psychological life, they remain unconsciously driven by forces they cannot control. And those forces will inevitably impact everyone around them. Red flags in psychological self-defense. Narcissistic inflation identified narcissistic inflation as one of the most dangerous psychological states. This occurs when someone becomes identified with their persona or an idealized self-image, losing touch with their authentic self and their limitations. Individuals in narcissistic inflation believe they are superior to others, special, or entitled to different treatment. They have a grandiose sense of self-importance and an insatiable need for admiration. Signs of narcissistic inflation include grandiose sense of self-importance and uniqueness, belief that they deserve special treatment, lack of empathy for others, exploitation of relationships for personal gain, and rage when their superiority is questioned. Meet Jennifer, a successful marketing executive who constantly talks about her achievements, name drops important contacts, and subtly puts others down. She believes she's more intelligent, more attractive, and more deserving than her colleagues. When someone receives recognition she feels she deserves, Jennifer becomes openly hostile and vindictive. The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are. Carl Jung taught that true psychological health comes from being authentically yourself, not from inflating yourself beyond your actual capabilities or worth. Narcissistic inflation is a defense against deep feelings of inadequacy and shame. From a Jungian perspective, narcissistic inflation represents a split between the conscious ego and the unconscious shadow. The individual identifies completely with their positive qualities while projecting all negative qualities onto others. In relationships, narcissistically inflated individuals are incapable of genuine intimacy. They see others as extensions of themselves or as sources of narcissistic supply. They cannot tolerate partners who have their own needs, opinions, or successes. Jung recognized that some individuals seem to drain the life force from everyone around them. These emotional vampires feed off the energy, attention, and emotional reactions of others. Emotional vampires cannot generate their own emotional stability, or they depend on others to provide constant validation, attention, and emotional regulation. Common behaviors include creating drama and chaos to become the center of attention, playing victim to elicit sympathy and care, emotional dumping without reciprocal support, and boundary violations disguised as intimacy. Consider Lisa, who always has a crisis that requires immediate attention. Her relationships are exhausting because every conversation becomes about her problems, her drama, her needs. She calls at inappropriate times, expects others to drop everything for her, and becomes angry when people set boundaries. Everything you need is inside you, you just need to access it. Carl Jung believed that psychological health requires developing an internal source of stability and self-worth. Emotional vampires have never developed this internal resource, so they constantly seek it from others. Being around emotional vampires leaves you feeling drained, anxious, and emotionally depleted. You may notice that you feel exhausted after spending time with them, even if nothing particularly stressful happened. The passive-aggressive controller Jung identified passive-aggressive behavior as a particularly toxic form of control. These individuals express their anger and need for control indirectly. Through subtle sabotage, manipulation, and emotional withholding, passive-aggressive controllers cannot express their needs and anger directly, so they use covert methods to punish others and get what they want. Common behaviors include silent treatment as punishment, agreeing to requests, then sabotaging them, chronic lateness to events that matter to others, and subtle insults, disguised as jokes or concern. Robert, who never says no directly but consistently fails to follow through on commitments. When his wife asks him to pick up groceries, he agrees, but forgets. When friends invite him to events, he says yes, but shows up late or cancels at the last minute. Robert claims he's just going with the flow, but his behavior is actually a form of control. The greatest discovery of my generation is that a human being can alter his life by altering his attitude of mind. Carl Jung taught that taking responsibility for our thoughts and actions is essential for psychological health. Passive-aggressive individuals avoid this responsibility while still trying to control outcomes. From a Jungian perspective, passive-aggressive behavior represents a split between conscious compliance and unconscious rebellion. The individual cannot integrate their anger and need for autonomy, so they express it through indirect sabotage. Relationships with passive-aggressive controllers are characterized by confusion, frustration, and walking on eggshells. You never know what will trigger their subtle retaliation or emotional withdrawal. The chronic victim Jung recognized that some individuals become addicted to victimhood, using their victim status to manipulate others and avoid taking responsibility for their lives. Chronic victims have learned that being helpless and suffering attracts attention, care, and excuses them from having to take action to improve their situation. Signs of chronic victimhood include constant complaints about how unfairly they're treated, rejection of solutions or help, use of their victim status to guilt others, and an external locus of control where everything is someone else's fault. Consider Maria, who has been complaining about her job for years. She talks constantly about how her boss doesn't appreciate her, how her colleagues are incompetent, and how she's overworked and underpaid. When friends suggest she look for a new job, update her resume, or ask for a promotion, Maria always has a reason why she can't take action. I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become. Carl Jung believed that we become who we choose to become through our responses to life's challenges. Chronic victims remain stuck because they've chosen to identify with their suffering rather than their potential for growth. Victimhood serves several psychological functions. It provides attention and sympathy. It excuses personal responsibility, and it gives the individual a sense of moral superiority over their oppressors. Jung emphasized the importance of psychological boundaries for healthy relationships. Individuals who consistently violate boundaries show a fundamental lack of respect for others. Autonomy and well-being. Boundary violators cannot tolerate others having limits, privacy, or autonomy. They feel entitled to access all aspects of other people's lives and become aggressive when boundaries are enforced. Common boundary violations include showing up uninvited, going through personal belongings, demanding access to private information, and refusing to accept no as an answer. Consider Tom, who regularly shows up at friends' homes without calling first. He goes through their mail, asks intrusive questions about their finances and relationships, and becomes angry when people ask for privacy. Tom believes that if you're real friends, there should be no boundaries. The most important thing is to be true to yourself. Carl Jung taught that being true to yourself requires maintaining your boundaries and respecting others' boundaries. Boundary violators cannot tolerate this authenticity because it threatens their need for control. Now that we've identified the red flags, let's explore Jung's insights into protecting ourselves from psychologically dangerous individuals. Jung emphasized the importance of trusting your intuitive responses to people. If someone makes you feel uncomfortable, drained, or anxious, pay attention to these feelings. Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Carl Jung established clear boundaries about what behavior you will and won't tolerate. Enforce these boundaries consistently, even when faced with manipulation or guilt-tripping. Remember that you cannot heal someone else's psychological wounds. Attempting to fix toxic individuals only enables their dysfunction and drains your own energy. When possible, limit your contact with psychologically dangerous individuals. If you must interact with them, keep interactions brief and focused on necessary topics. Don't try to handle toxic individuals alone. Seek support from trusted friends, family members, or mental health professionals who can provide perspective and guidance. The path forward. Jung's ultimate message is one of hope and empowerment. By understanding these psychological patterns, we can protect ourselves and choose relationships that support our growth and well-being. Remember that choosing to walk away from toxic individuals is not selfish or cruel. It's an act of self-preservation and psychological health. You have the right to surround yourself with people who support your authentic self. The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are. Carl Jung's insights into human psychology provide us with a roadmap for identifying and protecting ourselves from individuals who operate from their unintegrated shadow. By recognizing the signs of projection, narcissistic inflation, emotional vampirism, passive-aggressive control, chronic victimhood, and boundary violations, we can make informed decisions about who we allow into our lives. The goal is not to judge or condemn these individuals, but to protect ourselves and choose relationships that support our psychological health and authentic growth. As Jung taught us, the journey toward wholeness begins with honest self-examination and the courage to face our own shadows. It continues with the wisdom to recognize when others have not yet begun this essential work. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens. Carl Jung. May you choose to awaken, to grow, and to surround yourself with others who are also committed to the path of psychological wholeness and authentic relationship.